I'm a 25-year-old woman, and when my wife Julie and I were planning our wedding, we were immediately drawn to a Hawaiian honeymoon. The sun, the sand, the tropical resort and turquoise water, it all seemed so dreamy and perfect. We even planned our wedding around a beach on mainland US as a way of prepping for that bliss. It went really smoothly, and Julie and I were very happy, surrounded by our friends and family. Before we go into the honeymoon itself, here's a little backstory. I actually met Julie in a scuba diving tour of sorts. She offered to be my diving buddy, and we've been looking after each other ever since, really. When we found a few scuba diving tours near our honeymoon resort, we didn't hesitate to make a few reservations. That's how we found ourselves just off the southern coast of Molokai on a bright sunny day. The group consisted of our diving instructor, a couple of other young guys on vacation, Julie and I, and an older man. It was a fairly modest group, but sometimes those were more relaxed because there were less people for the diving instructor to keep track of. Together, we all went out to the appropriate depth, the only sound being the chatter between us and the roar of the boat as its engine revved. We all finished putting on our gear as the instructor went through his speeches about sticking to your diving buddy and not to resurface too quickly. All the standard safety stuff. Out of the blue, the older man on board turned to Julie and asked if she'd be his diving buddy. Julie looked at me confused and laughed uncomfortably. Actually, my wife and I already planned to go together, but you're welcome to join us if you want, I guess. The man's face suddenly twisted into a mask of anger. I could even see the tips of his ears turning bright red as he spoke. Well, it was more like just below yelling. "You're a slur? You shouldn't even be here." I immediately spoke up. "Well, what the hell is that supposed to mean?" He opened his mouth to reply, but the instructor interjected before he could say anything else. "Hey, I don't tolerate that kind of behavior on my dives. If you don't want to be taken back to shore, you better start behaving now, sir." We sighed, grateful for the help in de-escalating the situation, but we were also incredibly embarrassed that it happened in the first place. Even on our honeymoon, we'd somehow managed to find someone like that. While the man busied himself with getting ready, Julie and I checked each other over and told ourselves we were still going to have a fantastic dive and an even better honeymoon. The instructor gave the go-ahead, and altogether we flipped over backwards into the cool blue void. It had been quite a while since we'd been diving. I got a bit disoriented, but Julie grabbed my hand and I steadied myself. Though I couldn't see her face through the thick scuba gear, I could tell she would smile if her mouthpiece let her. I remember the water near the surface was a crisp blue expanse that never seemed to end. A familiar sensation of floating was taking over. Below us lay a reef. There's no other word to describe it but simply majestic. The coral sprawled onward like a big plant-like apartment complex, all different spectrums of colors. And speaking of colors, the sea life swimming around was just as much a rainbow. From the small fish picking at the coral all the way up to the small reef sharks stalking above them, the whole thing was just taking my breath away, and being there with my love made it all better. We swam next to each other for a while, exploring the area and seeing everything it had to offer. The rest of the group had split up to do their own thing. The two inexperienced guys were staying more near the surface, getting used to the feeling of being underwater, while the older man was presumably sticking close to the diving instructor, since he didn't appear to have a partner. I can't say I wasn't happy to not be near him. The further away he was, the better. I signaled to Julie I was going to check out some of the sharks a bit farther away. Not a big fan of that one, was she? I left her for a minute to do her own thing, while still making sure we were well within sight of each other, as per diving rules. I'd only be away from her for a second or two. Well, a second is all it took. I'd just about reached the area I wanted to explore when I felt something slam into me so hard it almost pushed my respirator out. I clenched my teeth to keep that thing in there and looked around. I thought I'd been hit by a shark being curious or something, but that quickly went out the window when a hand grabbed my arm from underneath me and tried to tug me down. I was nearly being flipped upside down, straining to get a look at what was happening. A person reached for my face, and with horror I realized they were trying to grab my mouthpiece. I couldn't scream, I couldn't think. I could only hang on for dear life with my teeth and pray this person couldn't pry it loose from my mouth. My breathing quickened, bubbles swished by us, fizzing in the struggle. We were attracting attention from the nearby wildlife. One or two sharks even swam up against the person attacking me. They seemed startled by this and batted at the sharks, who carried on as if nothing were happening. Thankfully, that was my chance. I lashed out at the person as they were trying to deal with the wildlife, pushing myself away and trying to kick them with my flippers as I swam. Not exactly the most effective, but at least it was something. I immediately swam back to Julie and gestured that we needed to resurface right now. We made our way to the top of the water as quickly as we could, and all I could do was rip off my mask and hug her. We made our way back to the boat and had a chance to talk safely. When she heard that someone had tried to drown me under the water, her eyes darkened, and she was more furious than I'd ever seen her. She immediately knew who it had to be, and on some level, so did I. That old man, the one who'd had a problem with us since we started this dive. I was in shock he'd try to kill me over such a petty reason. That's just sick. We sat on the boat with the driver until it was time for the others to resurface, who were just as horrified as we were. When the man climbed back onto the boat, I felt my stomach drop. I hated the idea of sitting with him all the way back to dry land. When he pulled off his mask and saw me staring and Julie glaring, his eyes got really, really wide. Julie immediately went off on the guy, calling him a sick bastard for trying to kill her wife and screaming that he'd tried to kill me. The instructor got between us to try and sort out the situation, and when I gave my statement about him trying to pull out my breathing tube and holding me underwater, the instructor got out his phone and dialed the police. The two young guys held the man down as we quickly headed to shore, where the authorities were waiting to question me and seemingly arrest him. I know it sounds anticlimactic, but it all got settled out of court. He ended up being related to the head of the police force in some way. That in itself is terrifying, but it's even more terrifying he would think to just kill someone so casually for not aligning with his personal worldview. Julie and I didn't go scuba diving for the rest of our trip because we were worried something like that might happen again. Maybe we'll go out one day because you can't spend the rest of your life in fear, but we'll be much, much more vigilant. I've been a long-time reader of scary stories, so it's honestly kind of surreal that I now find myself writing about an experience I had very recently. It was a Friday night, and I had gone to bed early as I had work on Saturday morning. After reading in bed for a bit, I drifted off at around 10:30, only to wake up about an hour later to screaming and people yelling profanities. I thought that my girlfriend was watching a movie with the volume way up and went out into the lounge room to ask her to turn it down a little. Instead, the TV was off and my girlfriend was staring at the front door with her eyes extremely wide. Our apartment is on the ground floor of the building, and so our front door opens directly out into the lobby. The voices in question were coming from that area. I couldn't make out specifics. In my defense, I was half asleep, and the language of the country I live in is not my first language. There was a lot of swearing involved, though. My first thought was that some kind of domestic dispute was going on outside, but after listening in closer, I realized it was a group of men that sounded extremely aggressive. I looked at the WhatsApp group chat for my apartment building and saw to my horror a message from one of the people in it. There were armed men in the building, and we should not leave our flats no matter what. The country I live in is experiencing a marked uptick in crime, and I've heard stories about armed groups of men robbing entire apartment blocks, but those had seemed like fairy tales to me. That was my first thought, though, that these men would kick down every door and rob us. One of my dogs started to growl at the commotion outside. I shushed him, and thankfully he obeyed. I heard a commotion in the apartment above me and went out to my patio to see what was happening. I heard what sounded like a large piece of furniture being knocked over and women and children screaming in terror. At this point, I had no idea what was going on, but I knew that by now they would have robbed us already if that's what they were planning to do. My girlfriend and I decided to hide in a small shed at the end of our patio, monitoring the group chat on our phones. Our bigger dog silently stood outside the door of the shed, keeping watch, his eyes locked on the sliding door at the end of the patio. I found my smaller dog later, cowering between the washing machine and the dryer. After 10 extremely tense minutes, I heard the screeching of tires, signaling what I hoped was the perpetrators fleeing the scene. Eventually, someone in the group chat said the police had arrived, and breathing a huge sigh of relief, I came out of hiding and opened the front door. Alarmingly, on the floor of the lobby, there were zip ties that had been cut, and the security guard was talking to one of the tenants. A man was bleeding from a large gash on his face and looked extremely shaken. Over the next few hours, the full story would unfold. The man I saw with the gash on his face was the tenant in the upstairs apartment, the one I heard the commotion coming from. He was the owner of an import-export business, and for whatever reason had a sizable amount of money, in cash, hidden in his apartment. Someone had obviously found out about it and planned out the robbery that woke me from my sleep on that Friday night. A group of 8 men had followed him into the apartment building's garage and ambushed him as he got out of the car. Judging from the gash on his face, they roughed him up quite a bit as well. Some of the group of 8 had gone to the lobby, surprised the security guard and zip-tied him. The remainder had gone up to the apartment itself, robbed it, and then fled the scene. It's fairly chilling to think a large group of armed men were mere meters from my front door. Hi there, you can call me Clara if you'd like. You know how sometimes you get that gut feeling only to find out later that it was nothing? Well, once, that feeling saved my life. This story took place 5 years ago. I had just inherited my grandparents' big house. It was beautiful and very spacious. But as I was still in mourning, it was too painful. I didn't want to live there. The house brought back too many memories of them, so I decided to sell it. I spent a whole weekend there, emptying and cleaning the house so that it would be perfect when the visits began. I did an inventory to make sure everything was in good condition. The lock on the back door of the house, which led to the kitchen, seemed to be broken and would no longer lock properly. I had to consider changing it soon. I told myself, though, that this particular weekend I already had enough work, and I would take care of it the following week. It's not like there was any rush after all. It was a quiet neighborhood with no problems, and the house was in no danger. The next day, everything seemed perfect. I cleaned everything from top to bottom. I had 3 visits scheduled that day for people coming to look at the home. A lovely couple with a baby who ultimately found that the house was too dated for them and they didn't want to have any work to do on it. There were also a couple of retirees who said they were interested, but I could kind of tell they weren't very excited. I didn't expect them to ever call me back, if you know what I mean. Then there was the last guy, a man in his 50s. He said he'd come to check it out for his wife and daughter. He asked me lots of questions about the house. I thought to myself, this might be the one. He seems really interested in the property. He noticed the problem with the back door as well, and I told him I would have it fixed within the week. He told me he would call me back soon and that he'd make a second visit with his wife and daughter that time. At the end of the day, I was quite tired, but I was happy to have found a potential buyer. Not having had time to eat lunch, my stomach was really starting to grumble. I decided to go grab something to eat at a nearby fast food restaurant. Before going to bed, I took a hot bath to relax and have a good night's sleep. The day before, I'd slept very badly. It was not my bed or my room, and being in the same house of my grandparents' passing gave me quite a lot of grief. I also missed my husband and children. After my bath, I headed into the bedroom to put on my clean underwear that I'd previously placed on the bed, but when I arrived, I saw they were no longer there. They were nowhere to be found. I was sure I had put them there, though. I looked around everywhere until I finally found them neatly placed on the top of the dresser. I told myself that with how tired I was, I must no longer know what I was doing. It was really time for me to get some rest. That night went well and I slept like a baby. The next morning, I started to prepare my things to leave and go home. I had breakfast and decided to have it in the kitchen when I noticed that the back door was slightly ajar. I didn't remember having opened it though. The last time I did that was during my last visit with the man to show him the lock, but I was sure I'd closed it since then. I told myself that since the lock was broken, perhaps it opened by itself with the wind or something. As I sat down to eat though, I suddenly got an extremely bad feeling. You know, the bad intuition that you don't know where it comes from. You don't know how to explain it, but you know deep down that something is very wrong. I thought about that day before, when I'd found my underwear in a different place, and then about the guy who came to visit my house the previous day. I started to think more about the questions he'd asked me. My daughter likes to be very loud when she plays around. Is the house well insulated in terms of noise? I don't want the neighbors to be disturbed. This house is really big. It's great. Do you think there's enough space to play games like hide and seek? I remember at the end of the visit, being a mother myself, I asked him how old his daughter was. He took a few moments before answering me. Oh, she's 15. And you know, my daughter likes to invite her friends to do those parties on the weekend. I hope that won't be too much a problem. I didn't think too much of it at the time, but what kind of 15-year-old plays hide and seek and screams while playing with toys? I finished eating, feeling more and more perplexed by the moment. I decided to leave the house as quickly as possible before I got completely paranoid. I tried to put things into perspective and reassure myself. I had a long way to go home though, so I decided to go upstairs one last time to use the restroom before leaving. Just before I did so though, I got an odd feeling that perhaps saved my life. For no reason at all except to reassure myself, I left out of the main door, locking it as if I was going to leave. I then re-entered the home through the broken kitchen door discreetly, and suddenly stopped in my tracks. I heard someone running down the stairs. Suddenly, I saw the man from the day before, with knife in hand. "Ah, shit," he yelled, banging his fist against the main door. From where he was, he couldn't see me. I was now totally panicked, my heart pounding. I don't even know how to describe the intensity of the fear I felt at that moment, but I'll remember it for my whole life. My survival instinct took over, and I decided to exit once more without making any noise. Once outside, I ran to my car. I drove and parked 2 blocks away and called the police while constantly looking around. I was afraid that even though I had my card, the guy would somehow catch up to me. A few minutes later, I went back, and the police were already there. No trace of the man. He had already run away. After that, I quickly had the kitchen door repaired. I changed the lock on the front door just in case, and installed a security camera as well. I took care to be accompanied by my husband or friends every time I made visits to the house, and I ended up selling it soon after. Today, this story is far behind me, but I was scared for my life, and I had insomnia and nightmares for months and months after. I keep telling myself, if I hadn't had that sudden urge to pretend to leave the house before going up to the toilet, I would have died, because that psycho was waiting for me upstairs with a knife in his hand. I'd say to trust your instincts. In the worst case, you end up looking silly, but just in case they're right, they won't deceive you. They've saved me more than once. Hi there. I would like to first clarify that obviously all the names used in this story are assumed names to maintain anonymity. My name will be Mary. I find it important to tell what happened to me because it could raise awareness of other people who may be in the same situation I was. It's first important for me to clarify that I'm a very responsible girl. I'm very well organized and on point in everything I do. I have a routine, and I hate doing anything outside of it. A few years ago, I met a man in a bar, and it was love at first sight on both sides. We'll call him Sebastian. I really thought that Sebastian was the one for me, and that for him, I was his woman as well. I felt something indescribable for him. We got together very quickly, and I directly introduced my friends and family to him. He never seemed to want to do it, though. I never met any of his friends or family, but honestly, that didn't bother me that much. I could understand why he didn't want to rush. We'd only been together for a few days after all. I didn't know anyone around him, though. We had no friends in common, nothing really. All our dates without exception took place at my house, because he lived in the suburbs a little over an hour away. And I didn't have a license at the time. Because of this, it was always him coming to me. One day, a little after a week after we made ourselves official, he was over at my house as usual. I don't remember why I decided to do this, but I went outside to clear my mind a bit. I still think this was possibly a sign from a guardian angel or something. As I said at the beginning of the story, it's something that very rarely ever happened to me, a time when I didn't stick to my usual routine to the letter, but today I felt the need to take a sudden walk. I asked Sebastian to accompany me, but he refused. I ended up going out alone. Everything went well, until I came across a kitten underneath a car. Worried for the little rascal, I immediately tried to grab him so he wouldn't run out and be run over by a car or something. I managed to get him out safely, and seeing that he didn't have a collar on him, I took him with me. We were in a neighborhood where cats tended to run away and disappear a lot, so we always used a WhatsApp group, which allowed us to ask or give information about cats that had disappeared. I took the cat home to try and find its owner, but you should know that my phone had a broken rear and front camera, so I couldn't take photos at the time of the little kitten I'd found. I thought directly of Sebastian. I asked him for a favor, and he agreed to lend me his phone for a moment so I could send the photos of the cat to the WhatsApp group, where I could find out if it was someone's lost pet. He went to the bathroom, and during this time I took a photo of the little kitten. Being a woman by nature somewhat curious and very guarded, I told myself that now was the time or never to search through the phone. Everything seemed to be going too good, too rosy to be true. I was convinced that he was cheating on me, but I was far from imagining what was really occurring. I started digging through his Instagram. How strange. He had several accounts, including the one he'd added me on by the name of Sebastian. There were many others, though, with different names. Paul, Ludovic, Esteban. I was convinced he really was cheating on me. I took a look deeper, and what I found in that moment turned my stomach and scarred me violently, and above all for life. In his messages, there were around 20 photos shared of me to another unnamed number, all of them taken well before we'd met, and all of them in candid circumstances. My clear routine was photographed and well established and sent to this mystery person. I immediately understood he must have been following me and observing me for several weeks without my knowledge. At that moment, I felt a horrible terror of having to confront him once he emerged from the bathroom. When he came out, I immediately felt that he was going to notice something was wrong, but he didn't seem to have caught on at all. He eventually left, and the first thing I did was call the police. Unfortunately, I had no way to prove what I had just seen. Upon arriving at the station and telling them everything I knew, the police promised to try and investigate, but they weren't sure they would even be able to find him, now that I knew that Sebastian was not his real identity. Moreover, the address he'd given me as his home address was a place inhabited by retirees, not a young person in his 30s. I didn't go home for a week after. I stayed at my best friend's house instead, and I blocked Sebastian everywhere. A week later, I learned that he had been found, and that this man, whose name was not Sebastian at all, was suspected of sex trafficking. He was currently awaiting trial. I moved as quickly as I could. He was sentenced to many years in prison after a thorough search of his phone and computers. I never really recovered from this event, and I'm even more paranoid than I already was. Above all, I wonder what would have happened to me had I not done something different than my routine and not encountered that little savior kitten in the street. Be careful of your surroundings and make sure to check out who you associate with. For some context, my name is Leo, and I'm 23 years old. I live in a studio apartment in a very recently built and well-secured residence. There's 3 doors with badges and codes and all that stuff before you're even able to enter the building. The neighborhood itself is quite popular. This story is relatively recent since it happened to me just last Friday, December 10th. If I get any episode 2s of this story or anything, I'll update this post in the future. Friday evening, I was having a little outing with my new girlfriend to the Christmas market. We ate something in town and went home. At one point, in a joking tone before bed, I said something stupid like, "If you're not happy, why don't you go home?" She joined in the game by pretending to leave, but instead shut the door and came right back. Instinctively, I checked to make sure the door was closed, because while speaking with her, I didn't hear her close it all the way. For some reason, I had a feeling that I needed to do something I usually never would do. I locked it. We already had so much security, and I'd always lived in places or apartments which did not have outside locks anyway, and only opened with the key. Anyway, after that, we ended up falling asleep around midnight. It's from there that things started to get a bit eerie. Around 2:40 or 2:50, we were both awoken by the sound of the doorbell ringing. The first time, it woke me up, and I emerged slowly, wondering what was going on. My girlfriend was still bouncing in and out of sleep, and told me to go open the door and see who it was. She was so out of it she thought it was 9 a.m., and that it was a neighbor that might need something. The ringing continued more and more excessively, as if the person on the other side knew that someone was there. I was starting to wonder what the hell was going on, and my girlfriend was starting to wake up more and more. After a minute or two, I decided to look discreetly through the peephole in the door. I told my girlfriend to be as quiet as possible and not make any noise. I tried not to make any noise either, while the person continued to ring on the other side. Right as I reached it, I suddenly got a feeling of being really scared. I put my hand on the door and was just about to open the peephole to look through when someone started scratching at the peephole area. At that time, I was extremely scared. I snuck back to bed and tried to think of what to do. The doorbell ringing was getting more and more erratic, and the scratching was too. They also started to knock and tap in multiple places. To be safe, I decided to just call the police. The noises immediately quieted down. I explained in whispers on the phone that someone was ringing and scratching at my door, and they were really scaring me and my girlfriend. The noises became even more eccentric after I said that. I was told the police were going to stop by. I explained that because of the way they were erratically behaving, I was worried the person would become violent, and I did not know how to let the police enter the complex discreetly without being attacked by them. After hanging up, the person started playing with the doorbell even more. This time, they'd press it for a few seconds to make a long ding, and then release it to make the dong, tapping in different places on the door and windows. My girlfriend was panicking, and I did my best to reassure her. I told her the police were on their way, and nothing would happen to us. I had noticed a detail, though, that really unsettled me. The light out in the hallway was off, but the noises were still ongoing. Thing is, there was a light detector right outside my front door, which was really sensitive. If there was someone moving out there, it should have gone off. This person must have been standing motionless in front of my door in complete silence, scratching and ringing while making sure not to set it off. In the meantime, I opened the shutters as quietly as possible to check for the arrival of the police. The noises quieted down for a good quarter of an hour, when all of a sudden, for a good minute, the person outside suddenly started hammering on the wall right next to my bed. After that, there was nothing more. I got one last scare, though, when I saw a car stopping outside and a young woman around 20 years old getting out none the wiser and heading toward the suspicious area. I grabbed a long knife in my hands from the kitchen, and then I went out to try and warn her about the suspicious circumstances. Fortunately, she returned without any problems, and there were no attacks from this mysterious person. About 10 minutes later, I saw a police car arriving. My intercom rang, and I opened the doors to the police. I explained to them what I just explained to you. They went around all the floors to check and make sure no one was there before leaving. The police asked me if I'd had any problems with people who wanted to scare or hurt me. Absolutely none. They also asked me if it couldn't be a drunk neighbor who had the wrong apartment, possibly. I mean, that does seem like something that could have happened. But in my opinion, someone who has the wrong apartment will at least try to put their keys in the lock. Not once had there been a sound of the person outside trying to do that. Usually, they would also try to call out to the person they thought was inside, so-and-so, open up the door, I forgot my keys. There was not even the sound of breathing. No footsteps, not a single word, nothing. I talked about it on my Facebook group at my residence. No one else was woken up by someone ringing their doorbell, but some people around us definitely heard the hammering blows. On top of that, I noticed a post from a few months ago in the group, a description of a strange, mysterious man who would come in at the same time as other people and always skulk about the building. I wish I had looked through the peephole to see if they matched the description in that post. I got too scared when the person started scratching at the peephole, though. I haven't slept well since. What's certain is that if it happens to me again, I'll buy a mini camera straight away. Now I always make sure everything is double locked. Fortunately, nothing serious happened, but I still get shivers down my spine, just imagining what would have happened if I hadn't made sure that the door was locked, and that it was closed properly after our little joke earlier in the evening. Good evening. My name is Rose. I'm 18 years old, and the story I'm about to tell sends shivers down the spine of everyone that hears it, at least in my experience. It was 2 years ago, when I was 16. I was going for a walk with a friend from our village, not far from home. We loved going into the forest and lying down in the grass for hours. In short, we loved nature. That day, we decided to go to the forest from around 10 a.m. to 11 a.m. then go out to the field for a picnic. Then all afternoon, we would go to places in the forest that we hadn't explored yet. You should remember that the path to this forest is very busy. Quite a few people were along the walk with us. There was one family with 3 young children, a couple of hikers, an older gentleman who I think used to come for a walk there every now and then. Once we arrived at the entrance to the forest, there were a lot of people coming back down as well. My friend had noticed one of them looking at us, a tall, dark-haired man who was randomly eating a pear by cutting it into quarters while walking with a Swiss Army knife, always from top to bottom to bring the piece to his mouth. Once he passed by us, the man stopped and whispered to us, "Be careful, I saw someone strange walking around with a knife." At the time, we started to get scared. I told myself that if hikers came here, it was because they knew the place quite well. I looked at the man and said, "Thank you very much for the warning, sir." He gave me a strange smile, as if he had something to hide. Around 10:50 a.m., my friend wanted to stop for a quick drink. We were still on the trail a little further down. Looking around me, I thought I could see a figure a little further down hiding in the bushes. I couldn't really be sure though. I didn't think much of it. There are a lot of people who go trail running at this time of year, so maybe someone just needed to stop and use the bathroom or something. 15 minutes later, we arrived in the field in the middle of the forest. It was really a splendid sight. We decided to stay there until 12:30 to eat and observe the view. During our picnic, I had to do my business. There were a lot of people having lunch at the same time as us though, so I had to go a little further away and go behind a tree. The position I was in was not really that comfortable. Once I'd finished, I looked up, only to find that right in front of me, standing there silently, was the same man from earlier. Just imagine the scream I let out when I saw that guy. The only thing I thought to myself in that moment was, he must have been watching us from the beginning. He's going to rear me now. He took off running. I found it strange, because when we'd been coming up to this area, he was going down the other way, but he left as if he were going out further into the forest. I ran back to my friend to tell her what I'd just experienced. We started going down the trail again, on guard this time because we were very afraid. 2 hours passed by without any sight of the man though. I'd now seen him 3 times since our initial arrival. My friend recognized in the distance the old gentleman who had been in front of us earlier on the main road. She decided to call out to him and ask him a question. Hello, sir? There was a guy earlier that told us there was someone in the forest armed with a knife." The man looked at my friend, then at me. 2 young girls like you, huh? A perfect target for the man in the forest. Then we really started to freak out. The old man started walking, and we followed behind him. My friend was getting stressed out, taking lots of glances as if she'd seen something, or rather someone. The old man led us to a path, which it turned out led to his house. He advised us of a route we could take from there to get back to safety. I asked him if he could let us into his home while I called my father to come get us, but the man started to panic. "If he knows that you entered my house, he'll kill all of us." The path he pointed out was a long one before reaching the main road. I told my friend the most stressful word in this kind of situation: run. We started running down the path. As I looked to my side, I saw that out in the forest was the man, running in the same direction as us, but not necessarily running towards us. I took out my phone to call my father, who lived 5 minutes of driving away from this area. Suddenly, we heard a huge scream of rage. I turned my head towards the guy. The man must have been very upset to see me calling for help. As my dad's car pulled in though, the individual finally turned around and ran back into the forest. Once in my dad's car, we cried with relief. My father notified the police, who came 10 minutes later. It turned out the man with the knife was a repeat rapist who primarily targeted women between the ages of 13 and 25. He was arrested quite quickly. Apparently, the old man was his father. I don't know about his life story really, but I will remember this for the rest of my life. My friend and I still live in our little village, and we've returned to this forest quite a few times since this incident happened. None of it happened again, of course, but that still doesn't stop us from being a little afraid every time we go out there.